humblemud.
I just recently got back from a trip to Las Vegas where I went for a work conference, and trust me, I did have my fair share of fun too. Somewhere in the middle of all of that, and on my flights to and from Vegas, I also got to play a lot of video games. And that actually got me thinking about a topic that I've been wanting to do for a while, and that's the concept of vacation games. While I often assume that the perfect vacation game for me is going to be one that's more arcadey and pick up and play, I mean, you guys know I love my racers, beat 'em ups, shooters, and platformers. What I almost inevitably end up coming back to are JRPGs, oddly enough. And on the surface, that might seem counterintuitive, but more often than not, that's what I end up diving into. However, I don't think all JRPGs are necessarily great for vacation. In fact, I think the most epic and story-driven, life-changing JRPGs that everyone rants and raves about are often not the best choice for a vacation experience, and to illustrate this, I'll tell a quick story. One memory I always go back to is a trip I took with some friends across the state. I was on a trip with 2 other people, and I knew we had a long drive ahead of us. I was in the back seat, so I was free to play whatever I wanted. And after hearing so much praise for Final Fantasy VI, or 3, whichever you prefer to call it, I decided to finally play that game. But even though I put close to 8 or 9 hours into it, I cannot tell you a single thing that I remember about that experience. The reason for this was because I was hanging out with people that I was still fairly new to, and I wanted to make a good impression. I was trying to build those friendships. So without really realizing it, I had inadvertently turned Final Fantasy III into a kind of background game that I was just playing on the side. And Final Fantasy III is just not a game built for that sort of treatment. It's a game that demands your attention, and so a lot of the story beats went straight over my head because I prioritized being present elsewhere. And that's really the core of what I'm talking about. Some JRPGs just don't work when your attention is split like that. Instead, the JRPGs I think work best for vacation hit the following criteria. They aren't terribly dense stories or heavy on dialogue or cutscenes. You shouldn't feel lost when you come back to it if there's been a gap since your last play session, and they also shouldn't be incredibly input heavy. So today, I'm going to cover some great JRPGs that fit these criteria, some obvious, some obscure, to hopefully get your minds going on what you might want to try on your next trip. And near the end, I'll share what I actually played in Vegas and why sometimes it's okay to break your own rules. The obvious and likely most perfect choice, if I'm being honest and if you're into this kind of thing, I have to suggest the Pokemon series first. Now here I'm playing Pokemon Leaf Green just because that's the one that I wanted to revisit, but you could substitute just about any game in the series here. I think Fire Red and Leaf Green were really special back then, especially because they were the first Pokemon remakes of their kind. So seeing that world again that I knew from Pokemon Blue, but modernized for the time, was really something else. And while we've seen many remakes since then, I think Fire Red and Leaf Green did a great job knocking it out of the park right out of the gate. These games are filled with quality of life updates, and there's one feature that these games have that I'm surprised aren't more commonplace in more games in general. Like, I wish they were just in pretty much every game, full stop. And that's the feature where the game does a recap reminding you of the last 4 major things that you did on your journey. So if you played the game on the plane and then spent the next day out in the sun at the pool or something with maybe a few too many drinks, you'll still have no problem remembering where you were when you get back in bed later that night. A perfect vacation JRPG. Now we're going to go from probably the most obvious choice of all time to one that I don't think people talk about enough, and that's the original Breath of Fire, which has a port on the GBA. When it comes to this Capcom franchise, I think just about everybody puts their focus on Breath of Fire 3 and 4, and while I'm sure those are probably better experiences overall, the original lends itself really well to a vacation because at its heart, it's just a simple RPG with likable characters, enjoyable lore, and a backstory that's, while not terribly original, is still intriguing. Plus, I always think it's fun to explore the game that started it all. And thankfully for newcomers, it starts right out of the gate with some pretty high stakes. You wake up inside of a burning building while your village is under attack. The GBA port also brings some welcome quality of life updates, like a lower encounter rate and the ability to run, which effectively doubles your movement speed on the map. And when I went back to capture footage for this video, what hit me the most was the charm of this game. The graphics, the music, it really just envelops you. I also think the the day and night cycle is really cool. Within the first hour, you'll be sneaking into a city at nighttime, slipping past guards. There are a lot of really cool ideas here, and while the backtracking within this game can get kind of annoying sometimes, the variety of characters you'll recruit from all kinds of different species and locations more than makes up for it. It's a lot of fun. And especially with its auto battle feature, I find Breath of Fire a really fun game to grind. If you enjoy grinding, just kind of turning your brain off and powering up your party members, this is a really underrated one that I recommend you check out. Another really solid pick, Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade, known to many as simply Fire Emblem on the GBA, is probably the most handholdy entry in the series to be fair, but it's also the perfect starting point for newcomers. I also think Lyn is just the best girl ever. You get 3 campaigns within this one game, and despite leaning a little heavy on the over-tutorialization early on, each of these campaigns gets harder and harder, and despite the tutorials, the game still flows really well from the jump. Not to mention that permadeath is still very much here, along with secret characters to find and optional units to recruit, so at the end of the day, it's still a core Fire Emblem experience. The artwork is great, the music is great, and this is the game that brought Fire Emblem to North America and put it on the map, so there's some real history here. Every time I pop this one in, I just can't get enough of it. Yeah, the tactics aren't as deep as something like Path of Radiance or even newer entries like Engage, but they're still going to make you think. Plus, did I mention that Lyn is the best girl? Now, this last one from the GBA that I want to talk about isn't technically a JRPG, it's more of a strategy game, I guess, but I had to include it anyway because I genuinely think it gives Pokemon a run for its money when it comes to vacation RPGs, and that's Advance Wars. I actually played this one recently while my car was in the shop, so technically not a vacation game for me, I guess, but nevertheless, I was sitting there in the waiting room completely addicted. I honestly could have waited a whole lot longer for my car to get fixed if I'm being honest. One heads up though, the tutorial section is kind of long, and as far as I know you can't skip it, so just be prepared for that going in. At least the tutorial is actually helpful, and I would highly recommend actually listening to Nell when she offers advice. Oh, and by the way, maybe she's the best girl. But beyond all that, as I'm sure you can see, there's just so much charm here. The pixel art is fantastic, the music is catchy and upbeat and will absolutely keep you pumped, and even though you're technically committing war crimes against one another, it never once feels that way. It's addictive, it's simple, and yet there's a surprising amount of depth and variety in how you approach each battle. I'll also just say, I don't think this game ever needed a remake. The GBA version is a perfect way to experience it, and I personally think it looks best with the pixel art design. So yeah, it's not a JRPG in the traditional sense, but it hits every single mark for a perfect vacation RPG, so I had to include it. Now we're starting to get to some lesser talked about ones. If you enjoyed Fire Emblem or Advance Wars, there's a great chance you'll enjoy these games. Shining Force 1 and 2 on the Sega Genesis are truly wonderful experiences. I actually played Shining Force 1 for the very first time after my buddy the Gamersician convinced me to try it, and I ended up playing it all the way through while I was in Puerto Rico with Miss Humblemud last year. And honestly, I can't think of a better litmus test for a great vacation game than that. The game is episodic in nature, easy to pick up and put down, and the strategy, while satisfying, never really gets overwhelming. What kept me going through the entire adventure though was the music and the sheer variety of characters that you get to recruit. I mean, there are like winged units, all sorts of memorable designs, even on the most basic characters, and you'll find yourself getting surprisingly attached to the characters within your Shining Force. Because there's a little RNG involved in the leveling, you never quite know which character is going to become the standout. Every single one of the 30 possible characters that you can play as in this game has the potential to become an absolute force of nature if you take the time to invest in them. Some just take more time than others, but it often pays off. With that said, I do recommend playing this game via a method that allows you to rewind, because if you happen to get a brutal roll on a level up, as in like literally 0 stat points across the board, even though your character just leveled up, of course that's not too fun. These games share a lot of DNA with Golden Sun since we have some of the same staff here, though Shining Force is far less dialogue heavy, which is actually a big reason why this one made the list for me over Golden Sun. Shining Force's character designs and pixel art, especially in battle, are just such a treat for the eyes. This one was honestly a 9 out of 10 for me. Now, Shining Force 2 is a little darker and moodier from the start, and that one tends to be the one everyone talks about the most, which is why I really wanted to put most of the focus on the original, but both of them are fantastic, and both of them are well worth your time. They absolutely hold up. And by the way, the Gamersician has a great retrospective on Shining Force 1 if you want an in-depth breakdown of that game. Now, I know these games have recently received remakes on the Switch, so I won't pretend that's not an option, but before that, I think Dragon Warrior 1 and 2 was best experienced on the Game Boy Color, and I still think there's something really special about this version specifically. The Game Boy sound chip was utilized really well to bring that iconic Dragon Quest music to life, and I love how they handled these little cutscenes and opening moments in these games. Dragon Warrior 1 specifically is a game I've beaten many times and never get tired of. I do worry that as time goes on, more people will just gravitate towards the newer, flashier entries and skip these. Hopefully those recent remakes keep these games relevant, but I promise that they still hold up, even in an 8-bit handheld format like this. Now, in case you don't know, Dragon Warrior 1 is a solo adventure with this really simple comfort food quality to it. I mean, it set the foundations for JRPGs as a whole, so you're going to see lots of tropes here. Dragon Warrior 2 expands things significantly with party members and a lot more depth. And the nice thing about the Game Boy Color version, however you choose to get this, is that you get both in one package, so you can roll straight into the second one after you finish the first. And the first is pretty breezy, so it's kind of nice to just go right into the next one. If you're someone like me who started with the newer Dragon Quest, I promise you can go all the way back to the very first ones right here on the GBC and have a genuinely great time. Don't sleep on these. Now, these next two push the envelope a little bit when it comes to my own criteria. Both are a little easier to get lost in if there's been a gap between sessions, and both are quite a bit more input heavy. But I understand that not everyone here is going to be a fan of turn-based or strategy combat. In fact, most of them probably already left this video. But in case you're still sticking through this, I wanted to reward that patience with some action RPGs. The first I wanted to share is Ys 1 and 2 Chronicles, which I played the PSP version of on my PlayStation Vita. And fun fact, I actually played all the way through Ys Chronicles 1 while I was on a trip in Peru. And while I went on plenty of bumpy bus rides while I was on that trip, I found the action RPG gameplay surprisingly manageable even in those conditions because, ironically, the game itself features bump combat. And what I mean by that term is that you physically bump your character into enemies, and if you can hit them from the back or the side, you'll have the edge on them as long as your stats and gear are up to par. Do it right and you can even stun lock them like this. It's so sick. Boss fights are a different story though. Those can be quite challenging, and I'd save those for when you've got some downtime and can actually focus. Just a heads up, the very first boss in Ys Chronicles 1 honestly might be the hardest fight in both games combined. But the moment-to-moment dungeon crawling and exploration is totally manageable, and the gameplay is almost entirely on the D-pad, which is what I think makes it work surprisingly well in a vacation context. Ys Chronicles 2 will see you dungeon crawling within about 10 minutes or so once you get through the opening cutscene and some of the dialogue, which is super nice. It doesn't waste any time, and it also introduces some range gameplay through some magic attacks that Adol can learn. And I know I mentioned doing this earlier when I was talking about Dragon Warrior 1 and 2, but to be honest, I don't usually go straight from one game into its sequel. I typically jump onto something else. With these two, I ran through them pretty much back to back, and I think that says a lot about how tight and consistently great the experience is across both. And one more thing, you can't talk about these games without talking about the music. The PSP version features these incredible metal renditions of the original PC Engine CD soundtrack, the compositions of which were legendary, and man, it's amazing. Wear headphones. Now, you might be asking, Humble, where are all the Super Nintendo RPGs? Are you insane? Well, I've got one for you, but it's probably not the one you're expecting. A lot of SNES RPGs are these massive, dialogue-heavy epics, and so I'm not going to go with the familiar suspects here. Today, I'm sharing Soul Blazer. Now, this is a game that I had been eyeing for a long time and finally dove into last year, and it's such an odd, quirky, and charming experience. If you're a fan of ActRaiser like I am and didn't know this, you might get excited because this game was made by the same studio, Quintet, and it actually borrows a lot of the sound effects straight from ActRaiser. The music in this one is incredible, the pixel art is incredible, and the variety of environments and enemies that you'll encounter throughout your journey is so cool. But what really makes this one rise a cut above the others is that ActRaiser style element where outside of the dungeon crawling, you're essentially playing a village sim and solving local mysteries. The way it works is that when you defeat monsters, you revive the souls of the inhabitants of the town that you're working to save. And by the way, that doesn't just mean villagers, it also means things you'd probably never expect, like flowers, animals, and all kinds of characters you'd never really imagine having a conversation with. There is a serious story here, but moments like these keep things fun and whimsical. I would recommend playing this one with a guide handy though, because it can be occasionally unclear as to like where you should go next or what you're supposed to do next. But overall, it is a breezy experience. It's a little on the shorter side, and if you're a fan of something like Zelda but want something just a little different, this is a really fun action RPG that I think you'll enjoy. And unfortunately, it just doesn't get talked about enough. Last year, I did a deep dive into the 3DO library and came out of it with 3 games I really loved and still think about today. One was Road Rash, which has become one of my favorite racers that I still play to this day. In fact, I actually played it on the flight back home. Another was a Mercenary, which has become one of my favorite games of all time and lives rent-free in my head. And then there was Lucian's Quest. Now, this is not the greatest JRPG you're ever going to play, I'll tell you that right now. But what it is quirky, funny, and different. The game follows Lucian, big shocker there, a young sorceress in training whose instructor is away on a quest. While she's waiting for him, a warrior breaks through the doors of the tower looking for your instructor because he's trying to cure himself of the lycanthropy that he's been plagued with. Lucian hears him out and convinces him that she saw where they can find a cure via a crystal ball reading that she totally makes up on the spot, and so she drags him along on an adventure purely because she's bored and wants to go on one. What follows is this totally lackadaisical, almost oblivious romp against cosmic forces of corruption, with Lucian remaining cheerfully unaware of the actual danger she's in the entire time. And it is hilarious at times, it's gotten some good chuckles out of me. The translation isn't perfect, but that honestly adds to the humor, and it's surprisingly contemplative too. There's one track in particular, the one that you're hearing right now, that I find really relaxing and really love as a piece of music. A lot of times I would just kind of vibe there when I would hear this one, and I took a lot of screenshots while I played this game, and usually it was during those moments. Combat-wise, Lucian's might look like a strategy RPG at a glance, but it's actually a standard turn-based system. The twist here is that the environmental objects on the battlefield, like rocks or trees, can actually block movement and stall action, so you can strategically position yourself behind cover, bait enemies into wasting turns on obstacles, and then move in for the attack. It's not terribly deep, but it gives the combat a little more texture than it first appears. And the environmental destruction is not just limited to the battles. You can destroy almost anything that you see in the overworld, especially once you get a weapon with the right destruction attributes. Quick pro tip for you, when you reach the second town and can buy a weapon with 4 destruction, go back to the first area where you started the game and break down the blocks surrounding that treasure chest that you couldn't reach previously. There's a weapon in there that's a significant upgrade for your warrior. And also, let's be honest, it's really fun to just randomly destroy people's interiors. Lucian's Quest was a really memorable and tight experience, one I flew through from the moment I started it. It's surprisingly good, and while yeah, it's not the greatest JRPG you'll ever play, it's fun, and at the end of the day, I think that's really all that matters. One final thing, I'd actually recommend playing the 3DO version over the Sega Saturn port, which is known as Sword and Sorcery. It's a long story, but the 3DO renders its polygons better, at least with this game, and I personally prefer the character portrait art on the 3DO. Plus, it's pretty awesome to say that you played and beat a 3DO game. Not many people can say that. So, what JRPG did I actually spend time with on my most recent outing? This one goes to show why rules are sometimes meant to be broken and why nothing I've shared today should be taken as gospel, instead a jumping off point. I played none other than Final Fantasy VII while I was in Vegas. Now, I haven't beaten it yet, I'm still working my way through it as part of my backlog challenge this year, but on this trip I had a lot of time to myself where I could focus. I had a hotel room to myself, long flights, and my Retroid Pocket 5 with its great battery life, life made for a pretty killer combination for playing this one. I've been slowly chipping away at it, playing it in my local library on the weekends, as some of you guys know, and thankfully on this trip I got to keep that energy going. Now, Final Fantasy VII is not a universally great vacation JRPG. It has a lot of cutscenes, lots of dialogue, and the active time battle system doesn't lend itself well to situations where your attention is split, which can lead to moments like I described earlier with Final Fantasy III on that road trip all those years ago. So it's not one I recommend playing if you're socializing, sightseeing, or just trying to be present with other people. But if you're on a chill trip with downtime to yourself and you can throw some headphones on, a must because the music is incredible, as I'm sure many of you already know, then yeah, this might be the pick for maximum escapism and fantasy. So yeah, these are some RPGs that have worked for me in the past that I've played while I'm out, and I hope this list inspired you to think differently about the kinds of games you might play on your next trip. I'm curious though, I would love to know what genres of games you often play when you're on vacation or traveling. Is there something that you usually stick with? Do you often find yourself playing something you didn't expect? Are there JRPGs or RPGs in general that you distinctly remember playing on vacation and have some memories that you would like to share? And if you've got more suggestions for me that you think fit these criteria, I would love to hear them. Any and all thoughts, I welcome them all. If you're still here, thanks so much for watching, and as always, stay humble.